Take Back Your Health Now, Episode 97. Information contained in this podcast is not medical advice. It is for educational and informational purposes only. Please consult with your doctor before making any health choices.
You're listening to the Take Back Your Health Now podcast, the show that interviews the top doctors, athletes, trainers, and entrepreneurs to help you find the holy grail of health. Now here's your host, Dr. Dan Margolin.
This is Dr. Dan Margolin with another segment of Take Back Your Health Now, where we pull out all the stops in search of health's holy grail. We're extremely excited to have Dan DeBaun. He is an internationally recognized author of Radiation Nation, The Fallout of Modern Technology, and the inventor of DefenderShield, the most advanced EMF radiation protection technology for mobile devices ever developed. He'll discuss the health risks of wireless and electronic technologies and how to reduce those risks. Daniel's concern regarding the health impact of electronic radiation emissions grew out from over 30 years of engineering experience in the telecommunications industry, where he held a variety of leadership and executive positions. Daniel is a highly regarded author, industry consultant, writer, and speaker, as well as a frequent guest on national radio and television programs discussing EMF health issues. Dan DeBaun, welcome to the show, sir.
Well, thanks very much, Dr. Dan, for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat about a very passionate subject with me, electromagnetic radiation.
Well, this is actually, I'm so excited to have you on. My sister-in-law is so talks about this all the time. We can go into this a little bit later, but almost every conversation we have, she talks about the cell phone and basically she lives with my in-laws, and they recently had smart meters put on their home, and it drove her crazy. So, we'll go into that in a little bit, but I definitely want to come back to that because I definitely understand how passionate people are on this subject.
Yes, it is becoming very passionate subject matter.
How did you get involved, sir? Let's just take us back from the beginning. Go over your history and then how you found out about this.
Actually, it's funny. I worked for Bell Labs quite a number of years ago. My team used to develop the standards and do the testing for telecom equipment and technologies that were introduced to the Bell system. So I had a pretty heavy background in this stuff. And
so you're in the heart of this. I mean, you're really right in the heart of this.
Oh yeah. There was no question about when I was started at Bell Labs, that's when the cell phone was being developed in Bell Labs.
Wow.
And so I go back pretty far in this subject matter.
I mean, because cell phones have not been around that long. I mean, it seems like you couldn't live without them right now, but you go back 15 years, 20 years, am I right? I mean, they're really, nobody had them.
There was very, very, very little exposure of electromagnetic radiation even 10 to 15 years ago. Why? Well, nothing was around us. No technologies were around us that did the emissions that were potentially threatening our health. So fast forward today, you're giving your 6-year-old child the phone and telling him to play with it. And so all of a sudden, it's really, really close to our bodies. And that's really what we're going to chat a little bit about today, Dan.
Yeah.
So let me tell you how I got involved. About 5-6 years ago, my wife was, my boys were using their laptops on their lap for several hours at a time. My wife says, I want grandchildren. Get those things off. Now, she doesn't have scientific background, but I thought about it for a little bit, and I began thinking about the electronics and the emissions from the electronics, and I was thinking, well, that's possible. I wonder if there's literature about it, and so I looked into it, and I said, wow, after 4 hours, 25% of the male sperm is immobile. So, this is a potentially serious thing.
Wait. You're telling me that if you have a laptop on your lap for several hours, you can actually decrease the mobility of the sperm 25%?
Yeah, and it's been repeated in study work. This is not a speculation. We know it's a minimum of 25%. So when you go to your doctor and say, hey, I can't make babies, the first thing they're asking you is, where do you put your cell phone? Where do you put your laptop? Do you put it near your groin area?
Wow, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's like really amazing. And by the way, there was a study out in Italy about 10 years ago where they had a statistically significant metadata study where they found females were also impacted by something like a 2% non-tumorous cancer development in their groin area. And of those, a portion becomes cancerous. So we have lots of scientific data that says that electromagnetic radiation, the stuff around us, it can be potentially influencing our health in an adverse way. So
I mean, sure. Let me ask you: is any government agency monitoring this? Is this being looked after? I mean, surely they couldn't have just put this stuff out without some regulation or some experiments, or are we all just their giant experiment at this point?
yeah, we are the rats in the hole.
So we're it. Oh
We,
wow!
we,
Hold on, I'm gonna get
there's
a little bit. I'm gonna get a little bit of
epidemiology.
news before we go on.
Epidemiology studies are going on as we speak. Uh,
Wow.
um, yeah, well, it turns out that the standards developed were over 30 years ago. No one ever predicted the evolution of the cell phones, the tablets, in the connection of our technologies. No one did. And
It
and,
sort of exploded onto the scene.
yeah, and it was like for a 6 foot male that occasionally used cell phones. And I like to point out that no one had cell phones 30 years ago. We couldn't afford them, so they weren't around. And the standard was developed in, with a 6 foot male, fully developed 6 foot male.
Now, Dan, just tell us. So, first of all, just define what is electromagnetic radiation. What is that? And then, what were the standards that were developed on this 6 foot male?
Okay, so nature does not emit electromagnetic radiation. The electromagnetic radiation that we're exposed to today is from the technologies that are around us. The wires that are running by your house, the motors that's running in your refrigerator, the hair dryers you're using to dry your hair, all of those, as a byproduct of current flow, generate electromagnetic radiation. And
Hmm.
then when you have a cell phone, a Wi-Fi, a cell tower, a Bluetooth, all of those are RF signals, radio frequency transmissions, which are electromagnetic radiation. And because
How does that differ from microwave radiation? Is it
oh,
similar?
this is a great question, Dan. Um, a microwave, and here's a little tiny technical detail, is a 2.3 gigahertz signal. In other words, it's around 2 gigahertz. Really, not too fast, but not as fast as an X-ray, but pretty fast.
Okay.
And an RF signal, a microwave, a Bluetooth, a Bluetooth or a cell tower, Wi-Fi, that is around 2 gigahertz as well. So why is that important to know? Well, when you take a piece of meat and you put it into your microwave oven and you push the button and it says cook my meat, what is going on? Well, what happens is the water in between the cells heats up. And what happens then, the cells oscillate and you get cooked meat. So if you want medium rare, you put it a little bit. If you want fully well done, you put it a long time. Well, guess what? Your RF signal from your cell phone, when you put it to the head, is a thermally emitting signal. In other words, it heats the water up and oscillates the cells.
Oh my, I got that when you were saying that because I'm picturing my house and the cell phones and the refrigerator and the hair dryer, and I'm almost picturing myself being surrounded by these kind of things. And I just got the picture of the microwave, so that's not I'm not that far off with that picture.
Oh yeah, no, you're exactly right. And in fact, what I like to do is create an analogy. If you think of a RF signal as a bee, one bee in a room won't kill you, but if you have 1,000 bees in the room, they will potentially kill you. And guess what? All these, a cell phone has a Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and a cell phone connection. 3 RF transmitters. So when you have it right next to you, it's transmitting 3 potentially endangering emissions. Your
Wow.
yeah. So all of a sudden, you have all of these bees in the room, and there's some strong evidence of the impacts to our health. The things you're concerned about, the things your audience is worried about, is what is the impact to your health? And it really does. And we know for sure through much study over the last 5-10 years that there are consequences to having those technologies around us.
Dan, let me ask you a question. Going back, originally you said 30 years ago there was they did a study on or they came up with these certain levels for the 6 foot male. If we were to compare it, sticking with this theme of bees, right? If we were to say back then they were looking at 1 bee or 5 bees, and now we're actually being exposed to 20 bees. I'm making that up, but what if you had to put an analogy of how many bees back then versus how many bees the average person was exposed to right now?
Yeah,
What
the
would you
way I
say?
like to talk to about that is when I was in Bell Labs quite a number of years ago, and there was a mainframe that was 100 feet away. It had a lot of emissions at that time, right?
Yeah.
Fast forward today, that same capacity is now in my lap. So all of a sudden, all these electronics are getting all us around it, and you are right. Um, all of a sudden, you can have hundreds of bees, thousands of bees, if you don't watch what you're doing. And one of the things I'd like to continue chatting about the standard, because the importance of this stuff getting closer to us is we know for sure when a 6 foot male uses a cell phone, the heat around the cell phone can go up 2 degrees. We
Mm,
also know that a 6 foot male statistically has a penetration of about 1 inch. If we take a female or a teenager or even a child, 6-year-old child, and we use
right.
that same technology against the head, what happens? Well, to give you a contrasting view, that signal goes completely through a 6-year-old child's head.
Oh my God.
And think of this, you and I, we've been around a little bit, but and this technology, it's only recently in our lives.
Right.
But for our 6-year-old child, they have a lifetime. So we are in an experiment, wondering what's going to happen to all the people that are using technology so close to their bodies so early in their lives. Some physicians, by the way, would argue that the cell phone in your pants pocket for a female can possibly DNA damage the cell, mutate the cell,
Hmm.
and that cell can be emerged in subtending generations. So it's not just as an impact to the current the lives of those who live here on Earth. It's those that are subtending generations that could
So,
be
so
impacted. And
you're saying it could potentially change the DNA structures. It can
oh yeah,
mutate
we
DNA.
know for sure it does. In fact, Dan, what we know is when you are exposed to when you're close to these signals, when you have it in your pocket next to your bra, when you have it in your pants, when you have it to your head, the sensitive parts of the body, what you know for sure is that it can change the cells. And what happens when I say that, it actually the cell itself weakens, the cell membrane weakens, and oftentimes that's thought of as the basis of electromagnetic hypersensitivity. That is where when I use a cell phone, I hurt my head. It heats up, or
Right.
when I put it in my hand tingles. So the body is saying, stop exposing me to at least 20 some odd percent of the population today. We know they are more than 20% hypersensitive, electrohypersensitive.
I've got to tell you something. It's ironic, but absolutely true. I was getting like a burning on my left under my pocket, right sort of near my groin, if you would. I was like, what the hell is that? And I noticed this about a week ago that if I had my cell phone in my pocket, which is where I would normally carry it, especially on that day, I was just totally uncomfortable. When I took it out, after it was out of my pocket for about 20 minutes, it would go away.
Yeah,
And
well,
I literally stopped doing it about a week ago because I noticed and absolutely that if I put it in that pocket, my leg would start to hurt. And if I didn't, it would just go away. And I'm just like stunned that we're actually talking about this right now.
well, what you now experience is what we just spoke about. It's a microwave signal that's heating up the cells, heating up the water and oscillating the cells. So that is identical. Now the energy levels much less than a microwave, obviously, but science is learning, our research is learning that these low-level emissions do impact the cell. Now, no, let's continue the story about the weakened cell. If that cell weakens to a greater extent, the calcium actually can penetrate the cell. When it penetrates the cell, oxide builds inside it, and that cell itself can mutate or be DNA damaged.
Hmm.
So we know these signals can have that potential danger to ourselves, and in part that's why we see more and more people coming into the clinic, and they're saying, as you just said, my leg hurts. Doctor, my leg hurts because I have my cell phone in. Take your cell phone out of your pocket.
Right. It hurts when I keep hitting myself over the head with this hammer. Stop doing it.
Right,
Wow.
exactly.
Now, let me ask you a question. Are these changes that you're talking about, are these cumulative? Right? Like, I understand, like, with a microwave, you cook something and it's cooked. But are we slowly, cumulatively cooking ourselves like the proverbial frog in the pan kind of thing without realizing it?
Yeah, exactly. I'll give you two sets of data. Uh, Frontal lobe cancer has increased 2% for the last 10 years, compounding every year. So we know
Wow.
that the people using cell phones, there's a direct correlation to a cell phone exposure and frontal lobe cancer. Um, and these kinds of things are, um, we're learning more and more about them. Um, um, ADHD, leukemia, all these kinds of illnesses that we're feeling, they can be from one source of toxin, or they can be from ELF, which is considered a toxin, by the way. So the cell reacts the same way it does to arsenic, for example. Uh,
Now, what was the last thing you said? I'm sorry, you said ELF? Is that what you said?
yeah, ELF,
What is that? What is that?
extremely low frequency,
Oh, I got you. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
emissions, yeah, and so we know these emissions happen and they do damage. But this is a good time to me to introduce one of the studies that happened last year. Um, the National Toxicity Program, which is division of the federal government, that do toxin studies for the federal government, looked into what is an emission of a cell phone signal doing in an epidemiology study. So it was a very controlled, they eliminated all potential other sources of contamination to the environment. They had known transmitted signals, and they had a large population of subjects. What they found, much to their chagrin, by the way, was that there was a 2 to 13% increase in tumor growth
Wow.
as a result of those exposures, 2 to 13%. And it was statistically significant. That was what's pretty important. And what was really surprising to everyone, including myself, the heart was affected. and also fell into that 2 to 13% category. So when those exposures were being created in that environment, there was a known impact that was registered in the study. That was significant because
And this is a real study. This is no joke. I mean, they're
they,
really actually controlling the environment, controlling the situation. Oh my God.
yeah, they spent $25 million to set it up. And these guys they did a wonderful job. I looked over their study setups, and these guys eliminated, by the way. Remember I talked about the thermal emission components to it?
Yes.
That happens when it's close. If it's far away, you won't have a thermal impact. So what they did was they removed the thermal impact, and all they looked for was the biological impact. So
So wow. So you're saying too, then that would equate to the fact that clearly, if the phone is closer to your head, you're going to get that thermal impact. So there can be other repercussions that we're not even talking about here. But we're just simply talking about the frequency, the radiation coming off it. How, Dan, how far would a phone have to be from you for it to be considered safe?
um, um, let me answer another little question first for you.
Sure.
The That emission is impacting the cell in a very real way, and this has been replicated in many other studies throughout the world. And so it's not as if it's revolutionary and all of a sudden they found something out. What they found was that they replicated other studies that demonstrated that this was consistent exposures near term, near field were dangerous to the cells. Now, let me answer your question. Simple rule, Dan. Simple rule. If you're 1 foot away, when you have it a transmission directly against your body, that's like the worst condition.
Okay.
When you are 1 foot away, 80% of that danger is gone
Okay.
because it's a logarithmic transmission. It drops really fast. The power levels drop really fast by 4 foot 98. So when I said to you, remove the bees in the room, well, you
Yeah.
got to move them away from you a little bit, and you're getting much safer real fast.
Well, you know, though, I gotta tell you, I think of this. I'm driving. I remember this. There's a building in New York City where you drive by, and it's an apartment complex. Okay, and they have this giant cell tower up against the side of the building, and you can see there's an apartment that clearly either has a bedroom or a living room or something right there where somebody is spending a lot of time, and literally this massive cell tower is right up against the wall. Somebody, I always thought, even before talking to you or knowing that much about this, I thought you couldn't pay me to live in that apartment.
Yeah, honestly, that would be a very smart thing to do, not live there. In fact, I
Right.
was giving a lecture about 6 months ago, and someone asked me the question. I have this tower. It's literally at my right outside my window. What should I do? And I said, move.
No kidding.
Yeah, because it's one of the things we talked about was distance, right?
Yeah.
And duration's the other thing. If you're exposed for 30 seconds, you're fine, Dan. But
Okay.
if you're several hours of exposure, 8 hours of exposure when you're sleeping, that's a serious problem. So I wasn't being facetious when I said move, because the long-term biological impacts are far more likely, not thermal, but biological. And that typically, by the way, is far worse than the thermal ever will be.
Wow.
Cancer is not done from thermal emission; it's done from a biological impact.
So,
So,
so when you see people that sleep with their iPhone next to them or their iPad or something like that, again, going to the same sort of silly question, but one, should those things be completely out of your room, or if they are in your room, how far away should they be from you for at least some safety? Granted, they're going to be there 8 hours, even
yeah,
if they're, you know.
I really recommend that you have none of this technology in your bedroom, because if you're sleeping 8 hours, you're exposed. And this is a great example. It's not just the cell itself that's being impacted. You know, doctor, I have a cell phone next to me and I'm sleeping in my bed and I can't sleep. The doctor says, well, that's because melatonin's not being generated properly. It's being interfered with from the RF signal coming from your cell phone.
Are you kidding me?
No, it's not just the cell, it's processes within the body that are impacted. It interferes with the electrical infrastructure of the body. It interferes with the processes of developing other things in the body. Um, Proteins going back and forth from one cell to the next are interfered with, and they don't properly function when they're under exposure. So
This is unbelievable. Let me ask you one last thing along this line. These smart meters that are attached to homes, do they run on the same concept?
yeah, by the way, that's a cell phone, very close to a cell phone RF signal. And
They are.
yeah, but
And they're on. I mean, it's almost mandatory now that these are on all the homes. I mean, what do you do in a situation like that?
yeah, very, very simple, believe it or not. It's all about distance. If you have a meter that's on the wall of your garage and you have two cars in between you and the main part of the house, don't worry about anything. The distance is fine. It's a low level signal. There's nothing that's going to bother you. In contrast, if you have a meter that's on the bedroom wall and you have your bed headboard that's directly against it, move it because there's no question it will interfere with all the things we spoke about. And you should at least move it 10 foot away from that, at least 10.
At least 10 foot away. So
Yeah.
this is important information. I mean, this is amazing. I mean, this is a great interview. I mean, how widely known is the information that we're talking about? Is this something that I mean, because I've heard little bits of this, but the way you're putting it and the importance of it, I just have never heard this before.
Y-
Am I just like do I have my head covered? Am I not paying attention, or is nobody talking about
Well,
this?
believe it or not, Dr. Dan, the reason I wrote Radiation Nation, The Fallout of Modern Technology with my son, was I was really frustrated. Why didn't all of us know, have a little bit of sense? I smoked when I was 12 years old because I wanted to be a big man.
Right.
And then at I only found out in recent years that I could die from cigarette smoking. I don't smoke for many, many years, but
Right. Right.
the science community, the people who put tobacco out there, they knew that at that time, 40 years ago, that there was a link with cancer, but we didn't know it, right? And
Sure.
so
There were doctors out there saying, "Hey, I smoke Marlboro or I smoke Camel or whatever it was with the commercials."
yeah, I remember an interview with the head of Philip Morris by a bunch of pediatricians, and they asked if a pregnant woman smokes, is something wrong? Is it bad for her health? And he said, absolutely not. But the baby could come out smaller, and what woman wouldn't want a smaller baby? That was the mentality at that time in the late 70s.
Oh my God.
It's and so, in other words,
I guess along with that, in the winter, if you use a cell phone to heat up your head,
you're
it's a little warmer, right? Like, so who
right,
wouldn't want that, right? Save on hats.
right, exactly. Yeah, you know, it's really it takes so many years for us to learn that what we have been doing could be endangering us. The cigarette smoking, trans fats, right? The same
Yes. Yeah.
thing. Biochemists 50 years ago said it's not the fat in your eggs or the cholesterol in the eggs that's killing you, it's the trans fats. It took 50 years before it was taken out of, it was banned now, essentially banned. But that's what's happening with this too. But what I was saying before was part of the reason I wrote Radiation Nation was I was frustrated. I looked into the science study work going on, and there was a preponderance of very well documented study work. And why wasn't the physician learning about it that practiced, that had a practice in a local space they lived in? Why wasn't the science message getting out to the community that are being exposed to these emissions. And so I wrote a book. And it's funny. Did I tell you that when a cell actually diminishes under the exposure, um, it also, your immune system is now, it's speculated that the immune system is actually suppressed. This was done.
So it actually shuts down the immune. So you're saying that the radiation exposure not only affects the cell, but is actually closing down the immune
Yeah,
response of the body.
yeah,
Wow.
exactly. And the funny part about that is when I wrote this book, I sent it to Dr. Ali Johansson. He's out in Sweden. And Dr. Ali Johansson read this and he said, "Oh my goodness, this is a wonderful. I learned a lot when I read your book." And it was funny that he said that because he was the one who found out about the immune system suppression. He was the one who found out about the mechanics of penetration of the cell and the impacts to the DNA.
Wow.
Yeah, and so what I found was this silo of expertise in the science community, and somehow it wasn't getting out to the world. And so that's part of the reason I wrote this. In fact, there was one doctor who was one of the most well-known radiologists in the country, and he called me and he said, "I always understood ionized radiation, where the electron is knocked out of its orbit and then all of a sudden positively charges that electron, and that's what kills you ultimately."
Right.
This stuff is non-ionized radiation. That is, you don't knock that electron out of its field, but it has the same long-term impact potentially under exposure. It's just less levels of exposure, levels of strength in those exposures. So it's a longer period of time to have an impact.
I'm thinking of what was it, Marie Curie, back in with the early 1900s, where with X-rays, where she was first working with them, and she died, I think, in the 1920s of anaplastic anemia.
She died of the stuff she invented.
That's right, right. I'm listening to you talking. I'm thinking, holy crowley.
Yeah, she didn't know. She didn't know.
She didn't know. Ay, ay, ay. Let me ask you, we're talking about the United States. What about European countries? Are we all being fried, or do they have better standards, or how is the rest of the world looking at this?
Believe it or not, Europe is much smarter than we are. They don't allow, they allow half the energy levels in the cell phones, in the tablets, in the laptops.
Oh, wait. Let me ask you. So you're saying that we could make computers and things with less energy being emitted? It's possible to do that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, in Europe they did. It's as a side note, I as a result of what I found, I wanted to protect my sons, so I actually built them some technologies that would shield them.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, I actually built the product for my sons to protect them, right? And their friends liked it, and then their friends of their friends wanted it. So all of a sudden, I became building in a product for the industry that is a shielding. The part of the story I want to say is when we did that, all of our sales were in Europe. It wasn't in the U.S. It was like
just because there's more awareness there.
Yeah, they're more aware. They're more aware, and the standards are more strict. The technologies are not able to produce as much emissions as they do in the U.S.
What agency is supposed to be regulating this?
Oh, the FCC. But but remember, the FCC does not evaluate toxins. They establish standards for technology. So therein lies the dilemma. It's like this in-between space where, like, they're defining a standard and it's impacting the biology of our bodies.
Wow.
Yeah.
So nobody's really
No.
What's going on?
If you want to find protection, you need to find it yourself, because it's going to be a while before the common knowledge occurs in the population, just
Do,
as
do
it
you,
did with smoking.
yeah, it's funny because I almost get the impression that in the United States, a lot of people almost feel like they need to take no responsibility, that there's some agency out there and that someone will always be looking out for them. And when you confront them with stuff like my sister-in-law, speaking, I guess, with my in-laws, I mean, they were sort of like, oh, that's ridiculous. That's a conspiracy. That's like tinfoil hat stuff. And there was really no even reach to learn more about it per se, because I guess it's just so ingrained that there's some government agency somewhere that will do it. And surely they wouldn't release something unless it was tested. And I guess we're saying that that's not the case.
That's absolutely not the case. And remember, we gave you two examples where you would think that would be true, and it wasn't, with the trans fats and with cigarettes.
Yep.
This is
Yep.
a third. If you want protection, you have to take the precautionary measures, because we won't see any change real quick to any of these standards that allow technologies to do the emitting that they do. In fact, by the way, I didn't talk to you about what it is that is of concern when you talk about emissions. There is a when a cell gets hit by electromagnetic radiation, it's when the standard was created, it was a constant load. It was a sine wave, a constant sine wave. And so the cells tolerates that pretty well. But then, 5, 8 years ago, it became a digital signal. And when it became a digital signal, it became on, off, on, off. So what does that mean? If you take a piece of concrete and a piece of steel and put 10,000 pound load against that concrete, the concrete won't break. If you lift it and you drop it down, lift it and drop it down like a jackhammer,
Yep.
that's what there is speculation of why the cells are responding that way. Well, fast forward, the next technology that's coming about is known as 5G. 5G actually doesn't have just one on off. It has two on offs. So now there's multiple jackhammers hitting the cell. And the medical community, some in the science study work community, actually has fought with the FCC and said, why are you emitting such potentially dangerous technologies onto the population without any study work? And they ignored it. Believe it or not, they ignored it.
Wow.
So,
I mean, is it financial interest? Like, why?
oh
Why
yeah,
are they
it is.
financial?
Well, in this case, a great story. There was a consortium 30 years ago that was created with cell phones. The head of that was actually being funded by all the cell phone companies. And fast forward today, he changed his job and he became leader of the FCC for 5 years. And he was the one who agreed that there was no problems.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
Similar to the doctor that we were talking about before with the pregnant
yeah,
females,
yeah,
I guess.
exactly. It's incestuous almost.
Yeah, let me ask you, as we wind down the show, we always ask our guests what they consider to be the holy grail of health. So I'm going to sort of just turn around and just pose that question to you. If I were to ask you what the holy grail of health and maybe even how it relates to what you're talking about, what would that be, sir?
Well, it's funny. In general, you really need to be aware of your environment, and you really need to ensure that you police what the environments you live in. And in terms of electromagnetic radiation, you must take preventative action. You can take it. You're not a victim. And there are very simple things we spoke about today, where if you limit the time these technologies, then you're fine. If you keep it a distance away, you're fine. Be aware of where the bees are in the room, and make sure you turn them off. At night, turn your Wi-Fi off with a timer. Simple stuff you need to worry about, but beware that there is an impact to your health. We know it from a science point of view, and it is endangering our lives.
Daniel DeBaun, how would people that want to read your book, find out more about you, purchase DefenderShield? How would they do, sir? How would they do?
What they can do is go to DefenderShield.com. That's DefenderShield.com. And we have our book available to there. And we have a series of products that are actually shielding products that can protect you from the emissions of the technologies you use. And by the way, we probably have more of the scientific study work than any other websites in the country about this subject matter. We try to
Wow.
help inform those about the problem. So go to DefenderShield.com and learn more.
Wow, Daniel DeBaun, a very, very powerful talk, sir, and thank you for educating us because I've heard little bits of this before, but I've never heard it laid out like this, and I never realized the risks that were being posed to myself, my family, my patients, my friends. So thank you for putting this information out there.
Dr. Dan, again, I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to share with your listening audience some of the stuff we're learning about the environments we live. So thanks again, Dan. I really
Yeah, as we learn more, I'd love to have you back on to
I
discuss.
love to talk about these things.
No, that's great. I just want to talk to my audience for 1 second because I think, we've been doing these shows now, Take Back Your Health Now. We've done well over 90 shows. We're getting we're getting well over 4 or 5,000 downloads a month and growing and stuff. But the information in these segments is so powerful, and I think you don't really hear this very much. You certainly don't hear it on mainstream media. And I really want to get these messages out. I really want to help our friends, our family to prevent these things from affecting them years down the road. And I need your help to do that. Honestly, I really do. So if you would, after listening to this, if you thought it was as awesome as I thought it was, if you would go out and commit to telling 2 or 3 people to listen to this program and to really get this information out, it would be really greatly appreciated. Mr. DeBaun, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to having you back, sir.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
This episode is sponsored by New Jersey Foot and Ankle Center in Oradell, New Jersey. Remember, when you have a foot problem, you've got a foot doctor in the family. Weekend and evening appointments are available. Call us at 201-261-9445. Once again, that's 201-261-9445. Thanks for listening. Check out the show notes over at drdanspeaks.com. If you're loving the show, head over to iTunes and leave us a review, and we'll catch you next time.